in a very, very competitive market like personal development. And that's why we have Neville here, because he's a counselor. And one of the first questions I want to ask, we have had him on before, so if you watched the last interview, you can probably skip to this bit using the headline, or the table of contents down below, that's the right word. So why, Neville, why did you actually choose to become a counselor in the first place?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey for me because it's like I had already had a bit of a career progression. I had started off as a school teacher and hit burnout, worked my way through that, stayed in education for a little bit longer, then realized I didn't want to do that anymore. And for a little while, it was there was a sense of like I don't really quite know what I want to do. And I moved into human resources and did some admin and some business training in there, and then had the opportunity to can start looking at postgraduate study. And when I'd had my burnout experience way back when I was in my early 20s, I had encountered this whole idea of counseling, and it interested me. But at that time, I felt like I was a bit too young to go into that. And but I did know that I had been the kind of person that people had talked to for many, many years. Even in my teens, people would sit there and they'd tell me stuff. They would they would like spill their story, their deep dark secrets, some things that were very painful, some things that were very personal, and it was kind of like at the time when as a teenager I'm sitting there going, I don't know why you're telling me this, but okay, I'm just kind of here, and and somehow I was able to hold that space for people. And when I encountered the idea of counseling and realized that there were people who actually do that kind of thing for a living, it interested me. And so fast forward into my 30s, and I was in the human resources field, and I was kind of feeling like this wasn't really the right place for me to be. It was it had been a good, useful experience, but I really wanted to do more that was helping people, more to help people to be well and to be able to process through some of the difficult experiences that they've been through. And the human resources space really didn't allow me to do that. So I had the opportunity to return to Australia at that point to go and do postgraduate study in counselling field, and moved into the counselling space as an employee, and then did that for about 6 years, and then realised that I was heading for burnout again and needed to somehow find a way to get out of that burnout space. Felt like in the organizational space, there were just this constant pressure to produce and to meet KPIs and to yeah, there was just a never-ending stream of work. There was a cap on how far I could progress in the role that I was in, and I was really feeling very stuck. So what I finally decided to do was that I decided to step out of employment altogether and move into the self-employment space, which was really scary because I'd never considered that I'd be a business owner. That really wasn't my plan when I first went to university. I thought I would be an employee, and that was all I knew. And I didn't know anybody who had actually been in business. No, or put it this way, if they were in business, I didn't know much about what they did and what was involved. So there was a very, very big learning curve for me around like, how do I run a business? It's like I know how to do the counseling side of things, but how do I run a business with that? And that was really it. I mean, I've been now running my own practice for like just over 10 years now. And I'm still learning. There's still so much more to learn about running a business.
Well, as long as you haven't been in jail for tax fraud, things could be going worse. They definitely could. Well, that happens to some people. I remember that was the in business school. That
It's
was the
not
thing.
the kind of business we advocate here. Always pay your taxes.
Well, in business school, the thing that they always taught us in accounting was remember to do the tax thing right, otherwise you can end up in jail. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I will actually listen to this bit, even though it's very boring, because it's apparently
Yes.
very important.
And incorporating other people who are professionals in that area is a really good thing because those boring
Yeah.
bits are quite boring and very complicated too at times.
Yeah, especially if you go into the tax code, which something we won't do in this video. That will take a very, 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 very long time. One of the other very important things in business, having the numbers there is definitely important. But another thing is standing out, especially with you being in like the personal development market. It
Yeah.
feels like when I'm going out and meeting people, like every fourth person I meet, they're in coaching
Yep.
or some kind of personal development. You ain't specifically a coach, but you kind of cater to the same audience and compete against each other. So how do you stand out in that space?
I think the answer to that question starts with the realization that if you're going to go into business and talk about competition, it's always going to be a battle. It's like I'm going to be taking people from somebody else, and the realization that you have some unique things to offer needs to be the focus. It shouldn't be let me see what everybody else is doing and how I can stand out against them. It's about what is it that I'm doing that is actually different or particular or a particular focus. And sometimes that takes a bit of time. I know for me, when I started off in business, the whole marketing concept was just foreign. I had never had to do that. I didn't know what to make of this. I thought, I'm a counselor. If I tell people that I'm a counselor, that should be enough. And really, it wasn't, because people got me confused with, "Oh, you work for the council." It's like, "No, that's not what." "Oh, you're
A
an
little bit
accountant."
different.
Well, not that either. And so there was confusion even around the term or even around the name. And my initial thought when I went into private practice and started my own business was I was going to do a therapy practice, but because I knew that I had some energy issues around doing that full time, I wanted to balance out the counseling therapy work with something else that was not quite so emotionally intense. So my plan was that I would do therapy work part-time, and then I would do part-time in doing career support type of things, which I was interested in. And I felt that there was some complementation of experience and skills that I had. My skill set could allow people to work through their employment history quite effectively and make sense of that and be able to present that. So that was kind of where I was thinking I was going to head. And then I discovered that here I was actually pitching for two separate things. So people were going to come and see me for therapy. They may not necessarily want to see me for the resume stuff, or they might need both. But often I was finding people were coming to me in a crisis situation where they needed to get a job really fast, and so the therapy was always taking a back seat. And the resume stuff was being pressured like crazy to say, like, I've got a job interview next week, can we get a resume together? And it's just like, this is not at all what I wanted to be doing. And then the complexity of some of the career stuff was I came to the realization that my skill set wasn't as suited as I thought I was. There was extra pieces of the skill set that I should have had if I was going to be offering some kind of career support thing. So your original question was, how do you find a niche? I mean, first of all, it starts with interest. It starts with, for me, taking a look at where I'd come from and what it is that I offered that was different from most other counselors. And for me, the third culture kid background was one of the things that was an identifier. It sort of helped me to sort of say, I've come from this background of having grown up between cultures, and that gives me some insights into the process of change. There are some people in the therapy space who are focusing very specifically on very particular diagnoses. I don't do that, and some people don't want the diagnosis. So I'm a really good person to work with that. So that's one of my differentiation points, is that I don't have to have a diagnosis for me to work with you. And here in Australia, we've got a whole system where if people want to do a medical approach to their mental health and their mental well-being, they'll go through a mental health care plan using their doctor to go and get that plan sorted out. And then they can go through the Medicare system and can get some kind of Medicare rebate based on our Medicare system. Now I work outside of that system altogether, so I'm not able to offer that option. But there is some certain amount of freedom that comes with that too. So it's about recognizing that because I'm not working in the Medicare system, I don't have the limitations that come with being in the Medicare system, which often include things like long waiting lists. The rebate is okay, but it doesn't cover everything. So my rates are actually, that's just what they are. You're not getting any changes with that. But by the same token, there are no caps on the service as well. So in the Medicare system, there's only a certain number of sessions you can access in 12 months. I don't have that. If you feel you need to do more work than the Medicare cap, I am available to do that. So, and looking at things like because I'm outside of that system, I don't do anything that goes on the public health record, and that can be really useful.
Yeah, that's attractive to a lot of people.
So, yeah, and the records that I keep for myself, and on the very, very slight chance that I might be called in for legal subpoena, which has never happened in 10 years, or actually longer than that. I have been in the counselling field for over 16 years now, and I've not ever been called in to testify. So the chances of that happening is quite small. But yeah, there are lots of win-wins with that, and it's about identifying them. I think when I first started out in private practice, there was very much a sense that we were in competition with psychologists who were in the Medicare system and social workers who were also able to access some of the Medicare stuff, and then other counselors who had other qualifications, and the whole competitive nature really worked against us, realizing that we could all win in this situation. It's like there are enough clients for all of us, and particularly if we're sole traders, if we're business owner operators, it's like we can't take on everyone. It's like we can, and to me, I don't see the point of having a long waiting list, because a long waiting list, while some people use that as a badge of honor, people really want to work with me. What it basically means is that you've got a long list of people who are not getting helped at all because they're waiting. And there are people out there that could actually take on the clients that are on the waiting list and help them to get well, and open the space then for other people, so that we're not having these long delays where people are sitting with mental health issues. So yeah, so that's a very long, sort of weird and tangential way of approaching your question. Does that help? Do you need any more clarification?
Well, it's a different way of looking at it, and I agree with it. You want to be doing something different. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're competing with everyone, like literally competing with everyone, because you're doing the exact same thing. It's impossible to basically do something somebody else isn't doing. If you're saying you're doing that, I think you're lying, because even though I don't see a lot of people doing what me and Mike do,
They're out there somewhere.
somebody somewhere that I don't know of, and he doesn't know of us, exists.
Yes.
So we
yes, there's
are.
nothing-
Yeah.
Yes.
So find a way to like word it and niche yourself so you're not competing with everybody else. So you're in a blue ocean. I think that's what the correct terminology is for the strategy in sales. Basically, where there's food everywhere.
Yep. And I think one of the things that's really important to keep in mind here is that even if you are doing something similar to somebody else, nobody will do it quite the way you do it. And especially in the service-based industry, it's like so much is dependent upon the personality that you bring to the space that you're in. So I'm doing a bit of work. I've got a Facebook group for counseling therapists who are in business or aspiring to be in business. And one of the things that I try to talk to them about, or at least expose them to, is that we all may be counselors, but we're all different. Our training, even if our training was identical, we would express that in different ways because of who we are. And it was interesting for me when I went into business, because I was terrified about putting myself out there. It was like this whole idea of like marketing and being visible. I'd never had to do that. And it was frightening. It was extremely terrifying to sit there and say, I've got to talk about my business and I have to associate myself with the things that I do. And I didn't know how to do that. And I wasn't used to being in the limelight like that at all. But somebody pointed out, I went and built a website for myself because everybody said you had to have a website. And so I built one and sent it out to friends of mine to get some feedback about like, what did they think? And of course, a lot of people are just like, oh, that's lovely, that's wonderful. But I had somebody that came back and said, your website is great, but there's nothing there about you,
Mm.
which I had avoided because I didn't want to put photos up there and I didn't really want to talk about myself. It's that my whole mentality was it's all about the clients. But this person reflected back to me, is like, you're in a people business and people work with people. They don't just work with ideas. They work with people in your space. And if they don't know who you are and they have no point of reference of who you are, they are not going to connect. And they're going to just sit there and go, so why would I work with you when I can work with this person that I can actually see and hear and all that kind of stuff? So that really challenged me. It didn't make it any less scary to do that, but it sort of made me realize that, okay, we're in a people business, and part of what we're doing is building rapport and building a relationship with people. And you can't do that from just by sending people messages that says you should do counseling, or just talking about the great work that counseling can do. It's like, well, that's lovely, but the person's actually going, if I need help, who am I going to go to? Not so much what am I going to do. And the realization that I had was that people come to the space asking two essential questions, which a lot of counselors miss. One is that, can I connect with you? So because so much of the therapy work is reliant on relationship, it's like people are sitting there going, do I actually click? And so that's the first question. The second question is that, can you help me? And sometimes you can't answer that question directly for them, but you can talk about some of the stuff that you have seen people do as a result of working with you. And that can be the point of reference there. So the challenge, of course, in the counseling therapy space is that we can't exactly say, I had a client who was dealing with this, 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 and this, and this is what. And it's just like, here's the client listening to this going like, they're talking about me. And it's like, sort of totally kill the relationship right there. So there are some challenges there in my particular space that other businesses may not have, about like, how do you do the social proof and where do you get the evidence that what you do actually works. But there are ways around it.
So, how would you recommend that someone's thinking about starting their own business? Really, I have two questions. One is, we've seen over and over and over again, Moss and I are in our world of people making the same kinds of silly bad habits and never wanting to change them. So, one is, how do you change a bad habit? But the other is, for someone starting a business that doesn't have social proof, they don't have testimonials,
Mhm.
but they know, we were in this position ourselves. They know what they have to offer is going to work because they've been using it on themselves.
Yep.
How do you pitch that? You had that problem. You can't go out and tell people who your clients are.
Yeah. What I've been doing in my particular space, and this has been developing over time, I didn't do this at the beginning, but it was to actually look at some of the important steps that were involved in making change, and talking to that, and talking about your own experience in working through that. So I mean, I have the experience of burnout, and I will periodically write about that and sort of talk about, these were some of the these are some of the things that helped me to get through it, and recognizing that at the time I didn't know that counseling was an option. And from what I know now, I'm sitting there going, counseling can help in these particular ways. I also talk a lot about my 29th year, which was the year from hell as far as I was concerned. It was the year where if anything went wrong, it went wrong in that year altogether. It was so stressful. And on just about every sphere of my life, something was falling to pieces. It was a very, very difficult year. And I will write about that and the impact of that, and what kind of helped me to make it through that particular year. And then yeah, just some of the things to pay attention to, so like for managing stress. So it's like, talking about personal experience when you don't have client proof can actually get people to recognize that you know something about what that's like. And in my particular space with therapy, clients are often wanting to build that trust with somebody who has some idea of what their life is like. So by me talking about my experience extremely stressful year and how I found my way through that, I'm actually talking to people who might be feeling like my world's falling apart. I've experienced burnout, or I feel like I'm experiencing burnout, or I feel like I'm heading towards burnout. And he's identified some of the things that I'm feeling and experiencing and thinking about right now. So those kind of things can be really useful in building that trust before you've had the opportunity to actually work with clients. Now, for me, I had the advantage that I actually worked in the counseling space for a few years before I went into business, so I could actually talk about some of the results that I'd got with the clients that I had worked with in employment. And that could be a way to do that. But again, I had to be very careful how I did it. And one of the things that I did and continue to do is start to talk about, I have had clients that have done this, and this, and not be specific about which client did what. And sometimes there are clients that have done multiple things, and I'll kind of cluster them, cluster the results together to say, these are the things that are possible through working through a counseling process. And that kind of stuff. It doesn't identify the individuals, but it certainly lets people know that I have experience working with something, and these are the things that people have actually achieved in the course of doing their counseling therapy. So I don't know. Does that answer your question there, Mike?
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful thing that certainly I'm learning a lot right now. That's why I love hosting this podcast. I do it for the audience, but man, I learned so much in the course of that. So really, even in my business, it's a constant battle. If we're like, well, if you're so smart, what great people have you worked for? And I'm like, my clients want to keep it quiet.
Yep.
They're very happy with the result, but they don't want me advertising that they're using my service.
Exactly. Yes.
And this is just the nature of my business. So it becomes, I'm thinking already about what kinds of articles I could start putting out about my own experiences like you did for yourself.
And I mean, even doing videos about it, I walked through that experience. We the last time we talked, you had this discovery that you had a third culture kid background, and you were starting to reflect on what's the impact been on that for me, and how has that shaped my journey going forward. So, and even some of that could be a connection point for some of the people who might be good clients for you. It's like, here's somebody who has lived outside of the US, who has had that experience, who gets that, and has a bit of a sense of what the thinking has become as a result of being between cultures all the time. That could be a very useful way to make connections with potential clients, because they're literally going, oh, Mike understands what my experience is like, and he's also in the business space. I wonder how those two things intersect.
I'm inspired now to write some articles and just see where that lands with people. I remember when I first started working in the States after having lived in China as a kid, and my first job here, and the Asians I was working with in the States kept calling me a reverse banana.
Yes.
Like you're white on the outside, but you kind of have this yellow inner part.
Yeah. It's funny, we have Asians here in Australia that call themselves a banana, where they're yellow on the outside but white on the inside, and it's just like, yeah, it's a classic. I didn't realize that translated.
Yeah, I think it's a really funny concept. I think Moss is, being a Dane from Denmark, and that's where he's lived, is probably the same all the way through at this point. But
well, you know what happens when we go adventuring? It's best for the world. We don't
best for the world that you don't.
Yeah, not too much adventuring. We do that.
Oh, no. As long as it's not on a boat, you're fine. You can venture any other way, just not on a boat.
Yeah, no boats. Boats are no go. One thing I kind of wanted to ask whilst I listened to your story, Neville, especially when you mentioned the year where you were 29. How did you deal with all of those inner critic, that voice that keeps talking down to you?
Yes, and I have to say that for that 29th year, the inner voice was pretty strong and had been strong for quite some time, but I didn't realize exactly how strong it was. So for those of you who are not aware of this term inner critic, it's essentially that little voice inside you that's always evaluating what you're doing, and always measuring you up against a standard. And usually the inner critic is not particularly complimentary. It's usually sits in there pointing out where you've missed the mark and how you failed and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of develop an inner critic in response as children, in response to the authority figures in our life who are often telling us that no, or don't do that, or this is the wrong way to do something, you need to go and do it like this, all that kind of stuff. So we internalize that over time, and that becomes something that we don't even need somebody on the outside to tell us anymore. We're just doing that for ourselves, and it can be useful. And in a lot of cases, for a lot of people, it can get out of hand, where it's so incredibly critical that you are beating yourself up for every little mistake, and every little thing that doesn't quite go right becomes a judgment on who you are. And that's where the inner critic has gone to extremes and is not helpful at all. Okay, so for me, one of the realizations that I had in that 29th year was that the inner critic was saying, it's like, everything's falling apart, so you need to take control. So I got busy, which was stupid, because it's like the whole busyness contributed to the whole, you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough, you're not dealing with it, and so on. So it went round and round and round in circles. And I finally reached the point where it's just like, physically, I was not responding well at all. I dropped a huge amount of weight. I was eating only because I had to, not because I was hungry. I wasn't sleeping well. I was having trouble getting up to go to work, but I had to go to work because the situation was dire, that I was living from paycheck to paycheck. And it was just an awful situation. And then I had relational stuff that was going on, and it was just all too much. And my body was telling me, yeah, you're not coping real well, and let's try and shed as much as we can, quite literally. So I lost like 50 pounds, or about 14 kilos. Is that about right? No, it's probably not right. It's probably more than that. I lost a massive amount of weight. And I've never carried a lot of weight, so I was like stick thin in about 6 months of that year. But within about a 6-month period, I dropped that much weight. So I finally reached the point where it's like, I'm being busy because I didn't want to deal with what was going on inside of my head. The inner critic was really loud. And if I kept myself busy, I could actually keep it at bay. But the busyness was becoming a problem as well. So it's like it was becoming a vicious cycle. It's like I was keeping busy so that I didn't have to think about things, but then the thoughts kept getting louder. So I'd get busier, and then the thoughts would get louder again. And I finally reached a point like, this is really silly. I'm doing too much. I'm exhausted. I don't know how to deal with this. And this is not working. The whole busyness thing and taking on more activity is not working at all. So I finally challenged the inner critic that was telling me that I had to keep doing more, and stepped away from everything, which was hard, because I felt like there was a part of me that the inner critic was like, you're letting so many people down by stepping out of everything that you've been involved in. And I mean, I just went down to the bare minimum. I was doing work and I had home, and that was as much as I could deal with. So, and that gave me then time to think and time to start working through what actually happened in that 29th year, and working through some of the grief around the losses that I'd had in that year. I mean, I'd had a girlfriend that had, the relationship had ended. I'd had a job that I'd loved that had ended. I had had financial difficulty all that year, and things like like I had to replace my car, and I barely had the money to do that. And then right at the end of the year, my housemate decided, I don't want you here anymore. You need to go find somewhere else to live. And I'm just like, things just can't get any worse. And so here's this whole thing going on with the inner critic saying, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. You got yourself in this situation, you. And I had to actually come to a place of working out what was my responsibility and what wasn't. And a lot of what I was doing, the inner critic was actually encouraging me to sit there and take on everybody else's ideas about what my life needed to be like. And I needed to let go of that. And I was in a very, very blessed position where I had a friend of mine who was in the Navy, who was on a deployment, who said, house sit for my place while I'm away. And that gave me the space and the time to actually begin to process through what had happened and what was going on for me, and then what my next steps were, which I was fine. Once I was able to work through some of that, the emotions were no longer in the way they were no longer stopping me from moving into the next phase of my life, which was trying to find a stable job in the situation that I was in. So, yeah, but I had not been able to get to that point because I was just running all the time, and trying to avoid the very emotions that were trying to tell me that something's wrong and you need to face these things. Yeah, so the inner critic, I talk with my clients about the inner critic has a job to do, and it's overstepping its bounds, and needing to put some boundaries around that inner critic is actually really, really important. It's like, okay, the inner critic might be giving you some ideas about some areas to look at, but when it gets to a point where it's actually beating you up and punishing you for every single choice that you make, it's actually not happening. And so it's just like acknowledging that, yes, I can see that there is this, and I'm going to deal with that. So it's almost like you have this little dialogue with it. Like, here you are, in inner critic. You want to make me do a whole bunch of stuff. That's not going to work for me. You're going to have to come up with a better idea. And so give it a particular job to do. And I mean, even though the inner critic is actually a part of us, to actually have this interaction as if I'm in control here, an inner critic, your job is not to take control over my life. I get to make that call, and you don't have to like it. But it's funny. It's like almost like the inner critic becomes that person in your life that wants to control you, and you kind of don't let it have control.
That's very insightful.
Hmm.
Yeah. Instead of fighting the inner critic or having the adversarial, it's like, no, you need to come up with a better idea.
And it's
just
like,
stop listening until that happens.
Yep, to come up with a better idea, and actually not looking at the inner critic as an adversary. It's like, I appreciate, inner critic, that you're actually trying to be helpful, and what you're doing here isn't helping me. It's actually making me feel worse. So you're going to have to try a different way of dealing with this. So, and this is probably a lot of people experience this externally as well, where it's like they're around people who their intention is probably to be helpful or probably to produce a positive outcome for everyone involved, but the method that they use is to beat you over the head with it and say, you've done this wrong, you've done this wrong, you've done this wrong. And it's like, that kind of thing is not endearing, for one thing. And for another, the whole negative emotion, the negative slant of that kind of assistance pushes people away. And they're just, I don't want to be around you because you never find anything good in what I do. So it's like, and I don't want to feel like that. So I'm just not going to be, I'm just not going to put up with that, or I'm not going to hang around where that kind of thing is on. So, I mean, people talk about toxic workplaces, and I think toxic workplaces often are built on this whole idea of like, we need to sit there and force people into the right kind of behavior and constantly point out people's flaws. My sense, the more I'm looking at, as I've been working with people over time, my sense is that people respond better when you focus their attention on what they're doing well. And training our inner critic to do that is something that will help us to be able to do it for other people. So it's like, rather than focusing on what's going wrong, it's like, what is actually going well? And okay, that's the foundation. These are things that you know how to do and you know how to do well. So how can we leverage that to deal with the challenges that we're facing in this particular area, rather than sitting there saying, you've done something wrong and you've got to fix it, and putting that pressure on.
Wasn't it interesting how I'm recalling how many people that I work with that they've learned in business to be very adaptable and to try to focus people. We call it excuse removal. Like, don't tell me what you don't like. Tell me what you want to do about it.
Yep.
The positive, come up with an idea to address this.
Yep.
And that's it. That encourages people to use their creativity and really think about how to make things better.
Yep.
And yet the inner critic, we still tend to beat on them.
Yes, I think the inner critic, if we give it too much power, it will tend to sit there and always want to identify the flaws in the plan. And I see that in myself at times. It's like I can play the devil's advocate. It's like here's somebody with this brilliant idea and they're really excited about it. And I say, well, what about this? And it's like you see them deflate. And it's like pulling that back and actually saying, okay, what do you see might be some of the challenges around it? Getting them to think that through themselves can sometimes be more powerful than you pointing it out for them. Because when you're pointing it out for them, you become an authority figure that basically says, your idea is not going to work. Whereas if they sit there and say, my idea is great, and there's this challenge here, how am I going to work with that so that this idea can still work? It's not deflating that idea.
Right.
It's giving people the opportunity to sit there and say, I hadn't considered that aspect. So as I consider that, I can make this better. And that can be an extremely useful way of approaching things rather than killing people's creativity and ideas by pointing out the flaws.
I think that's very, very, very good stuff. Yeah, go ahead, Maz.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that give the inner critic something to work on. I found that very, very helpful in my own life. Just giving it like food, it can like questions it could ask itself. If it's busy doing all kinds of other things, it's happy.
Yeah.
It's the inner, even though the word we use for in this episode, like the inner critic, isn't like necessarily a bad thing. Like the intention, it just wants to protect you. So you want,
And it wants the best. It wants a high standard. So that's actually admirable, but it can cross a line where it becomes unrealistic expectations, and you're ending up. And I mean, I will confess that I have always been an idealist. So the inner critic will latch onto the ideals and say, this is what you're actually supposed to be doing. And I said, the ideals are actually, they're ideals for a reason. It's like to aspire to, we're moving towards them. We don't necessarily get to them, or at least not consistently. So this whole idea of like the inner critic will latch on and just say, well, you're not doing that, so something must be wrong with you. It's like, no, I'm on a journey. I'm on a journey toward that. This is what I'm aiming toward. I'm not there yet, and it's okay that I'm not there yet. And being able to sit there and tell yourself, it's like, I don't have to be there for me to be okay, is a really big deal.
Exactly. One thing I quickly want to touch upon, you kind of spoke a little bit about being in the toxic workplace. My solution to that was, well, let's build my own workplace so I don't have to risk the chance of getting into another one again. So what would you say to a person, since you started your business a little bit later in life, as we talked a little bit about, so you definitely know both sides of the I don't know the correct word. You know both sides. You know both sides very well. We'll say it like that. Yeah. So what would you say to a person that has that? Should I do it? Shouldn't I?
I have to say that in my own experience, it's like I would never have considered going into business until I reached a point where it's just like, I don't feel like I have any more options left. It's like my options, the options that were available to me were to move into management, which was like, I don't want to do that. It's like, I'm watching the managers going, that's not at all what interests me. I actually like doing the kind of work that I'm doing, but I just feel like I've got nowhere to grow. I've got nowhere to grow in this particular organization. So some of the things that would be worth people considering is just like, what's really important to me? Like, what are my values? What are the things about this job that I actually like? What are the things about self-employment that is actually appealing that I can't get in an employment situation? And then recognizing that there's going to be a transition. There's going to be a point in time where there's going to be a whole big change that's going to happen if I'm going to step out of employment into self-employment. And am I prepared to take that risk? Because there is a risk involved in stepping out. And I have to say that if I were not, like, my wife has been my biggest supporter with this, and she has maintained full-time work. So that's taken some pressure off the business itself. So I've had the opportunity to be able to develop the business and get clarity around a whole bunch of things so that my business can be successful and hopefully then take over where she can let go of working altogether. And that's my goal, is to be in a place where the business allows her the freedom to leave work if she doesn't want to work anymore. It's like, how do you do this? If she hadn't been there, I don't think my business would have lasted very long at all. I mean, it would have folded, or I would have learned things really fast and not had time to reflect on what it is that I was doing and trying to build. So I've been in a fortunate position in some respects. So you need to factor in. It's like, what are my safety nets, and what are the things that I want to have in place. How much time am I going to give this business to see how it works? So factoring on all those kind of things might be really, really useful. I went and did a small business course because, as I said, I didn't come into doing business having any idea of what was involved in doing business, and that opened up my eyes to the range of considerations that were involved in running a business, a lot of which I hadn't even factored in, I didn't even know about. And it did raise more questions than it answered, to be honest. But at least it gave me a sense of what the questions were, whereas prior to that, I didn't even know that I should have been asking those questions. So things around like marketing, who am I looking to work with, what am I offering? All of those kind of questions can be really useful. What I've actually done over time is I realized I did some networking for quite some time before I relocated to where I am now, and they did a lot of business education stuff. So I took advantage of that and didn't realize how much I'd learned until I started my own Facebook group for counseling therapists who are in private practice themselves or are looking to get into private practice, and was realizing that a lot of them didn't have the business understanding that somehow I had. And so I've developed this 7-point framework to get people to look at. These are the 7 key considerations in your business that they almost become a cycle. So it's like, what am I trying to build? So that you're not trying to build someone else's business, you're trying to build your business. What am I trying to build? Who am I trying to reach? And what am I offering them? What are my business systems that help people have a smooth and seamless experience and don't cause me too much stress and don't waste my time doing lots of minutiae? How do I take care of myself and make sure that I stay well so I can actually run my business and have the life that I'm actually looking for? What's my customer service like? How do I take care of my customers? How do I build my reputation? And then what am I looking for? What would be the key indicators that would tell me that I'm on track, that I'm heading toward the vision that I'm actually creating, which brings me back to the beginning. So that kind of stuff, I'm doing some coaching now with somebody around that, which is really quite exciting because it's like, they're really having to wrestle through some issues that I know I had to wrestle through. And the niche thing that you mentioned earlier is a huge part of that. It's like, it's not self-evident if I say I'm a counselor, what it is that I actually do. So how do I help people is the question that I'm getting my coaching clients to ask themselves. How do I help people? And to try and get some clarity around that. And that is an emerging thing. It's not, you don't have one answer and you hold that answer. It's just like over time, as you're reflecting on your own practice and what's going on, that gets clearer, or or directions open up depending upon what it is that the clients bring in, because they influence how you practice as well, more than you would give them credit for. So that whole question that you're asking there, Mars, about stepping into business, there are a lot of considerations. I'd find somebody who's in business and have a conversation with them about their experience and some of the things that were challenges for them that they had needed to work through to get their business up and running, and some of the things that they've really appreciated about being in business. For me, I've loved the fact that I control my schedule. Like, I can sit there and book things. I can take clients in. I've got spaces for client work, and I've got my scheduling system in there such that it's connected to a calendar that if I book something else in, people can't book over the top of it. It's like, so there's these wonderful opportunities to be able to create the timetable and the schedule that works for me, and I'm really enjoying that. That's one of the things that I'm enjoying at any rate. So yeah.
It's definitely one of the big advantages of doing your own thing is
Mm.
you being in charge of your goddamn schedule. And
Yes.
nobody. Go ahead.
And I think one of the challenges with that as well, that
Yeah.
along with schedule, is that I actually have to manage that, because if I'm not careful, everybody else will fill up my time. So for me, one of the things, because I'm an appointment-based business, and I'm working with people and giving them blocks of time, I need to make sure that they know when I'm available. And it used to be, when I first started business, it's like I was super flexible. I'd go and work with whatever the client wanted to work with. And then it was just like, hang on, there are some huge risks with that they'll end up wanting a time that I don't want to work. And or they're overlapping with somebody else that I want to work with. And part of the reason that I was doing it at the beginning was because I didn't have my own space, and online therapy wasn't a thing at that particular point in time when I first started. That's been a more recent development. So I was dependent upon having a space to be able to do the work. And so I was negotiating, doing some casual rentals of spaces, because I didn't have enough clients to justify actually renting a space for a day or a week or at a time. So so there was all this negotiating that was going on around, like, when is the client available? When is the room available? When am I available? And it's just kind of going round and round and round in circles. So I'm in a much better space now that I'm actually able to rent my own office space full time. And that's made such a huge difference. But I didn't know that back then. I just thought, I'm going to go for the cheapest option, which had some limitations to it.
Yes.
So the whole thing about the business evolving, be aware of that. It's like, what you start with is probably not what it's going to become. It's going to grow. It's going to change over time. And that's a good thing.
Sort of like trying to nail jelly to the wall.
Yes.
So Neville, if people want to reach out to you, either because they have like a personal question or maybe even they're a business question, where can they reach you?
Where can they reach me? At the moment, LinkedIn is a great way to reach me. Connect with me on LinkedIn. That would be fantastic. And I'm trying to think what else. Facebook, I've got a Facebook presence if you want to go there. I prefer LinkedIn, but Facebook is there if Facebook's your thing. I think I will leave my email address with Maz and Mike, that they can put in the liner notes as well, if you wanted to email me to just say that you're interested in following up a little bit more, and I can then send a calendar link where we can set up a time to have a chat. So I'm very happy to do that. And I do have, if people are interested in considering the possibility of working with me, I do have spaces to take people on before Easter. So if people wanted to do that, I'm more than happy to have that conversation.
And I'm going to remind all listeners, Neville's the only counselor we've ever had on. There's a reason. He's the guy we'd send you to. We like him, and we're not clients of his, just so you know. But yeah, we think you should reach out. I mean, if you have any kind of struggle, especially, I know a lot of you must be struggling with that inner critic. You know, what if Neville lifts that chain off your mind? It's worth it, right? So make the call, send the email. All right, you good, Moss?
I'm just making sure nothing smart is being said at the end. You have a thing about saying something.
Not from me.
Well, you have a thing about
for me.
Well, the only smart thing you say the entire day when we record is when I hit stop recording. 2 seconds later, it comes out magically normally.
Realize the boss is a total idiot. I should know. I live with the guy.
Oh
dear.
But you probably have to go.
Thanks for being here again, man. I'm really intrigued. I'm inspired to go write some articles.